The Galactic Council chamber stretched across 3 kilometers of polished obsidian, its domed ceiling displaying the swirling nebulae of distant star systems. Representatives from 47 species sat in their designated zones, each area carefully calibrated for their specific atmospheric and gravitational needs. The air hummed with translation matrices working overtime, converting thousands of languages into comprehensible meaning. Ambassador Zexhai of the Vorthak Empire adjusted his crystalline breathing apparatus and studied the emergency session agenda with growing unease. The topic seemed almost absurd. Assessment of species classification error. File designation. Terrasol 3. His 4 eyes scanned the preliminary reports floating in holographic displays before him. Humans, a species that supposedly didn't exist outside of ancient folklore. The session is now in order, announced Prime Mediator Ylthara. Her serpentine form coiled around the central speaking platform. Her voice carried the weight of 10,000 years of diplomatic experience. We gathered today to address what can only be described as the most significant intelligence failure in Council history. A ripple of nervous energy passed through the assembled delegates. The Kalari contingent chittered anxiously, their insectoid limbs clicking against their seats. The massive Gorvani delegates shifted their bulk, causing small tremors in the chamber floor. Even the ethereal Nexari seemed more solidified than usual, their energy forms flickering with distress. For those unfamiliar with the situation, Ylthara continued, I direct your attention to Sector 7 Alpha, specifically the yellow star system designated Sol. 3 planetary rotations ago, our deep space monitoring stations detected massive energy signatures consistent with faster-than-light travel. The signatures were unprecedented. The central display shifted to show star charts, then zoomed in on a small blue-green planet orbiting a modest yellow star. Initial analysis suggested equipment malfunction. No known species in that region possessed such advanced propulsion technology. However, subsequent investigation has revealed a disturbing truth. Ambassador Kethanar of the Draconian Hegemony leaned forward, his scaled features creased with skepticism. Surely you're not suggesting that the old myths have substance? Humans are children's stories, tales told to frighten young ones into proper behavior. That is precisely what we believed, Ylthara replied grimly. Yet the evidence is undeniable. The beings that emerged from Sol 3 match every description found in our most ancient texts. Bipedal averaging 1.8 meters in height, with pale to dark brown skin variations. They possess only 2 eyes, positioned forward-facing for predatory depth perception. Most disturbing of all, they appear to be completely unaugmented. The chamber erupted in chaos. Delegates began speaking simultaneously in dozens of languages, their translation matrices struggling to keep pace. The very notion challenged everything they understood about evolution and civilization. Impossible, shrieked the Avari representative, her feathered crest flaring with agitation. No species can achieve interstellar travel without significant biological or technological augmentation. It's a fundamental law of development. Yet here we stand, Ylthara said, raising her voice above the din, or rather here they stand. The humans have not only achieved faster-than-light travel, but they've done so using technology that our scientists describe as impossibly elegant and theoretically sound yet practically absurd. Zexhai accessed his personal databanks. Scrolling through millennia of stored folklore, the stories were remarkably consistent across cultures. Humans as beings of impossible contradiction, capable of both tremendous kindness and terrifying violence. They were said to be the only species that could survive in nearly any environment without technological assistance, and the only ones capable of forming emotional bonds with other species. What do they want? Asked the Kalari Prime Speaker, her mandibles clicking nervously. Have they made contact? They have, Ylthara confirmed. Their message was unusual. They didn't demand territory, resources, or recognition. They simply said, "Well, hello, we'd like to help." A stunned silence fell over the chamber. In the long history of galactic politics, no species had ever introduced themselves with an offer of assistance. First contact protocols universally began with negotiations over territory, trade rights, or technological exchange. Help with what? Kethanar demanded. Everything, apparently, Ylthara replied. They've somehow analyzed our public communications and identified 17 ongoing conflicts, 23 ecological disasters, and 41 disease outbreaks across Council space. They've offered solutions to all of them. The implications were staggering. Most species required centuries of technological development and cultural exchange before they could even comprehend galactic-scale problems, let alone propose solutions. The humans had apparently done so within days of achieving interstellar flight. "This is a trap," declared the Nexari spokesman, his energy form pulsing with suspicion. "No species is this altruistic. They must want something in return." "That's what we assumed," Ylthara agreed. "We've run every possible analysis on their communications. No hidden messages, no encrypted demands, no subtle threats. They appear to be genuinely offering unconditional assistance." Zexhai found himself remembering the old Vorthak legends his grandmother used to tell. Stories of the Death Worlders who could survive anything, who fought not for conquest but for principle, who would risk everything to protect others. As a child, he'd dismissed them as fantasy. Now faced with the impossible, he wondered if his ancestors had been recording history rather than inventing fiction. "Where are they now?" he asked, speaking for the first time since the session began. "That's the most unsettling part," Ylthara admitted. "They're waiting. Their ship holds position at the edge of Council space, making no aggressive moves, sending no additional messages. They're simply there." The chamber fell quiet as delegates absorbed this information. A species that could travel between stars was demonstrating patience and restraint, qualities that most civilizations abandoned once they achieved significant power. "I propose we hear what they have to say," Zexhai said finally. "If they truly are the humans of legend, then we may be witnessing the return of something extraordinary. If they're not," he paused, considering the alternatives, "then we face an unknown species with capabilities that exceed our understanding. Either way, ignorance serves no one." The vote was closer than expected, but eventually passed. As the session concluded and delegates began filing out, Zexhai remained in his seat, staring at the image of the small blue planet on the central display. Somewhere in the depths of his genetic memory, ancient recognition stirred. The humans were coming home, and the galaxy would never be the same. Captain Sarah Chen stood on the bridge of the UES Endeavour, watching the massive space station grow larger through the viewport. The Galactic Council's primary hub was an impressive sight, stretching across several hundred kilometers of space with docking bays designed for vessels she couldn't begin to identify. Ships of every conceivable shape and size moved in carefully orchestrated patterns around the station, their design so alien that human engineers would need months just to understand their basic principles. "First time seeing the real thing, Captain?" asked Commander James Wright, her second-in-officer. Like everyone aboard the Endeavour, he wore the simple blue and gray uniform of Earth's United Space Service, looking remarkably plain compared to the elaborate displays they'd observed from other species. "Pictures don't do it justice," Sarah admitted. Checking the tactical display one more time, 6 escort ships flanked their position, each one belonging to a different council member species. The formations were clearly defensive, though whether they were protecting the station from humans or humans from the station remained unclear. Dr. Elena Vasquez emerged from the communications bay, her expression a mixture of excitement and concern. As the expedition's xenobiologist and primary translator, she'd been working around the clock to understand the flood of data streaming from the council station. "Captain, you need to see this," Elena said, handing her a tablet displaying translated text. "I've been analyzing their historical databases, the parts they've made publicly available. We're not just in their folklore, we're in their nightmares." Sarah scanned the document, her eyebrows rising with each paragraph. Stories of humans as unstoppable warriors who never retreated, who could heal from wounds that would kill other species, who formed bonds so strong they would die for strangers. More disturbing were the tales of human unpredictability, their ability to find solutions that broke conventional thinking. According to their legends, Elena continued, humans disappeared from the galaxy approximately 50,000 years ago. The circumstances are vague, but every culture has some version of the same story. We left voluntarily, saying we would return when the galaxy needed us most. "That's impossible," Wright interjected. 50,000 years ago, humans were barely using tools, let alone building starships. "Unless we weren't originally from Earth," Elena said quietly. "What if Earth was our sanctuary, the place we retreated to when we left galactic civilization behind?" The idea hung in the air like a challenge to everything they thought they knew about human history. Sarah had signed up for humanity's first interstellar diplomatic mission, not an existential crisis about their species' origins. "Incoming transmission from the Council Station," announced Lieutenant Torres from the communications station. "They're requesting permission to begin docking procedures." "Granted," Sarah replied, pushing aside her philosophical concerns. Whatever the truth about humanity's past, their present required her full attention. The docking process took 2 hours, complicated by the need to establish compatible life support systems. The Council had hastily modified an entire docking bay to accommodate human needs, installing atmospheric processors and artificial gravity generators calibrated to Earth normal. The gesture was both welcoming and slightly ominous, suggesting they'd been expecting human visitors for some time. Ambassador Catherine Walsh joined the away team as they prepared to disembark. A veteran diplomat with experience in dozens of international negotiations, she'd volunteered for the mission despite being well past retirement age. Her presence was meant to be reassuring, though Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that traditional diplomacy might be inadequate for what lay ahead. "Remember," Ambassador Walsh said as they gathered in the airlock, "we're not just representing Earth or humanity. According to their legends, we're the return of something they've been waiting for. That gives us tremendous potential influence, but also tremendous responsibility." The airlock cycled open, revealing a corridor that seemed designed for beings much larger than humans. The walls curved upward into shadow, and the lighting came from sources Sarah couldn't identify. A delegation of 5 aliens waited for them, each representing a different species. The leader, if such human concepts applied, was a tall, serpentine being with skin that shifted color as she moved. Behind her stood what appeared to be a living crystal formation, a creature that looked like a cross between a praying mantis and a spider, something that might have been descended from dragons, and an entity that seemed to be made of barely contained energy. "Welcome," the serpentine being said, her words arriving as meaning rather than sound through some kind of translation field. "I am Prime Mediator Yilthara. On behalf of the Galactic Council, I greet the return of humanity to the stars." Ambassador Walsh stepped forward with practiced grace. "Thank you for your welcome, Prime Mediator. I am Ambassador Catherine Walsh, representing the United Nations of Earth and all humanity. We come in peace, seeking understanding and cooperation." "Yes," Yilthara replied, her tone carrying nuances that the translation field couldn't quite convey. "That is exactly what the legends predicted you would say." As they moved through the station's corridors, Sarah noticed something unsettling. Every alien they passed stopped what they were doing to stare at the human delegation. Some appeared curious, others fearful, but all showed a level of recognition that went beyond mere interest in new species. They were looking at humans like people might look at legends come to life. The diplomatic suite they were shown to was larger than most Earth embassies, with accommodations clearly designed to house far more people than their small delegation. When Sarah mentioned this to their guide, a junior assistant from the crystalline species, the response was illuminating. The accommodations were prepared based on historical requirements. The assistant explained through rapid crystalline chimes that the translator rendered in musical tones. Previous human delegations apparently required significant support staff and specialized equipment. "Previous delegations?" Ambassador Walsh asked sharply. "When were humans last here?" The assistant's crystal form flickered with what might have been confusion or concern. "Forgive me, but our records are incomplete. The last confirmed human presence in Council space was approximately 47,000 standard years ago." The delegation size was substantial. That evening, as the human team gathered in their quarters to review the day's events, Elena shared her latest discoveries from the cultural databases she'd been granted access to. "I've found something interesting," she announced, projecting holographic displays of ancient artwork and textual records. "Every major galactic civilization has some version of the same historical event. They call it the Great Departure or the Voluntary Exile. According to these records, humanity didn't just leave the galaxy. They convinced several other species to leave with them." "Any idea why?" Sarah asked. "That's where it gets strange," Elena replied. "Near as I can tell, there was some kind of galactic crisis. The records are deliberately vague, but they mention something called the Hunger Wars, and a threat that traditional military responses couldn't address. Humanity apparently proposed a solution that required the evacuation of multiple star systems." Wright leaned back in his chair, processing the implications. So we're not just the return of one legendary species. We're potentially the advanced scouts for whatever solution our ancestors put in place 50,000 years ago. The thought was sobering. Tomorrow they would address the full Galactic Council, and their words might determine not just humanity's place among the stars, but the fate of civilizations they'd never heard of. Outside their windows, alien constellations wheeled in patterns that might once have been as familiar as home. The Grand Assembly Hall of the Galactic Council could hold representatives from 300 species simultaneously, though it rarely needed to. Today, every seat was filled. Ambassador Walsh had never seen so many different forms of intelligent life in one place, and she'd spent 30 years working in international relations. The diversity was overwhelming, beings of flesh, metal, energy, and substances she couldn't even identify. She stood at the central speaking platform, a small human figure dwarfed by the massive chamber around her. The translation fields hummed with unprecedented activity, as dozens of languages processed her words in real time. The weight of history pressed down on her shoulders as she prepared to address the assembled representatives. "Honored delegates," she began, her voice carrying clearly through the acoustic engineering of the chamber. "I stand before you not just as a representative of humanity, but as proof that the stories your ancestors told were more than legend. We have returned to the stars, and we come bearing both gifts and warnings." A ripple of movement passed through the assembly. Several delegates leaned forward in their seats while others seemed to shrink back. The Nexari representative flickered more rapidly, a sign of agitation Elena had noted in her cultural studies. 50,000 years ago, our species faced a choice that would define the future of this galaxy. We chose exile over conquest, hope over despair, and patience over immediate action. Today that patience bears fruit. Ambassador Zegshai of the Vorthak Empire activated his speaking privilege. "Ambassador Walsh, with respect, your words echo the ancient prophecies with disturbing accuracy. The legends speak of humanity's return coinciding with a great crisis. Are you here because such a crisis approaches?" Walsh had hoped to ease into this revelation, but the directness of galactic politics left little room for diplomatic subtlety. "Yes, Ambassador Zegshai. Our deep space monitoring systems have detected signs of the same threat that drove us from the galaxy millennia ago. The entity our ancestors called the Devourer has begun moving again." The chamber erupted in chaos. Delegates shouted in dozens of languages while their translation fields struggled to keep pace. The very name Devourer seemed to trigger primal fear responses across multiple species. Prime Mediator Yilthara raised herself to her full height, her serpentine form coiling around the moderation platform as she called for order. "The Devourer is a myth," declared the draconian representative, though his voice carried less certainty than his words suggested. "A story told to explain the disappearance of the Old Ones, nothing more. The Old Ones were us," Walsh replied calmly. "And the Devourer is very real. We've spent the last 50,000 years preparing for its return, developing technologies and strategies that can actually stop it. Our exile wasn't retreat, it was preparation." Dr. Vasquez stepped forward, carrying a sealed container that had caused considerable security concerns during their arrival. "With the Council's permission, I'd like to demonstrate one of those preparations." After a brief consultation among the security staff, permission was granted. Elena opened the container, revealing what appeared to be a simple metallic sphere no larger than a baseball. She placed it on the demonstration platform and stepped back. "This is a containment unit," she explained. "It holds a fragment of the Devourer's essence captured by our deep space probes 3 months ago." The chamber fell silent. Even the constant background hum of life support systems seemed to quiet in anticipation. "The Devourer doesn't just consume matter or energy," Elena continued. "It consumes information, consciousness, the very concept of existence itself. Conventional weapons are useless because it simply absorbs them and grows stronger. Our ancestors recognized this 50,000 years ago. She activated the sphere using a small control device. Holographic displays sprang to life around the platform, showing sensor readings and analysis data. What you're seeing is the essence contained within the sphere attempting to break free. Notice how it doesn't push against the physical barriers or try to overload the energy containment fields. The displays showed something that made several delegates physically recoil. The trapped essence wasn't attacking the container in any conventional sense. Instead, it seemed to be trying to convince the container that it didn't exist, that the very concept of containment was meaningless. It's attacking the mathematics, whispered the Kalari Prime speaker. It's trying to make the equations that define the containment field become impossible. Exactly, Elena confirmed. The Devourer operates on a level beyond physical reality. It changes the fundamental rules that govern existence itself. That's why traditional military responses failed during the original crisis. Ambassador Kethanar of the Draconian hegemony stood up slowly, his ancient eyes fixed on the demonstration. The War of Impossible Things, he said quietly. That's what our oldest records call it. We thought it was metaphor. It was literal, Walsh said. Your ancestors fought enemies that could make gravity run backward, that could convince space itself to forget how to hold matter together. Entire star systems simply stopped existing. Not destroyed, but retroactively never having been there at all. The sphere began pulsing with a rhythm that seemed to bypass the visual cortex entirely, creating an impression of movement that couldn't be directly observed. Several delegates closed their eyes or turned away, but the sensation continued. How did humanity stop it before? Asked the Nixari representative, his energy form stabilizing with what appeared to be tremendous effort. We didn't stop it, Walsh admitted. We convinced it to go dormant. Humanity's unique trait isn't our technology or our physical capabilities. It's our capacity for sacrifice and our ability to think in ways that break logical patterns. We offered the Devourer something it had never encountered before: willing subjects. The chamber fell deathly quiet. The implications of her words struck the assembled delegates like a physical blow. We convinced our entire civilization to voluntarily cease existing as a galactic power, Walsh continued. We didn't flee or hide. We strategically removed ourselves from the equation, making the galaxy temporarily uninteresting to a being that feeds on complexity and consciousness. Without sufficient nourishment, the Devourer went dormant. Elena deactivated the sphere, and the oppressive sensation of wrongness immediately lifted. That strategy bought us 50,000 years to prepare for its eventual return. We've used that time wisely. What do you propose now? Asked Yilthara, her voice carrying the weight of someone who already suspected the answer. The same strategy, but on a larger scale, Walsh replied. The Devourer is awakening because galactic civilization has reached a level of complexity that it finds irresistible. We need to convince it that the galaxy has become less interesting, not more. You're asking us to abandon our civilizations, Zexhai said, understanding flooding his features. I'm asking you to trust us to save them, Walsh corrected. Just as we saved ourselves 50,000 years ago. The exile worked because it was temporary and strategic. This time we know exactly what we're dealing with, and we have tools our ancestors could never have imagined. As the session concluded and delegates began filing out in stunned silence, many carried the same expression Zexhai had worn during the previous emergency session. Ancient memories were stirring across the galaxy, and the return of humanity was beginning to feel less like legend and more like prophecy fulfilled. The real question was whether the galaxy would have the courage to trust in legends one more time. 3 weeks after the initial address to the Council, humanity's true preparations began to reveal themselves across the galaxy. Captain Chen found herself aboard the UES Prometheus, a ship that hadn't existed in any public records until humanity's return was confirmed. Unlike the Endeavor's diplomatic configuration, the Prometheus was clearly built for a different purpose entirely. The reports are coming in from all sectors, Commander Wright announced from his station. The sleeper protocols are activating exactly as planned. Sarah nodded, watching the main display as dozens of star systems came online with infrastructure that had been hidden for millennia. Automated shipyards emerged from asteroid belts. Deep space monitoring stations revealed themselves from behind the facades of natural phenomena, and weapon platforms that had masqueraded as dead moons began broadcasting activation signals. 50,000 years of preparation, she murmured. Our ancestors really did think of everything. Dr. Vasquez looked up from her analysis station, where she'd been coordinating with similar teams across human space. Not just our ancestors, Captain. Every human who lived during the exile contributed to this. We've been the galaxy's caretakers all along, just hidden. The scope of humanity's secret presence was staggering. What the galaxy had assumed to be natural disasters, astronomical anomalies, and unexplained phenomena, had often been human interventions. Solar flares that prevented aggressive species from developing certain technologies, asteroid impacts that ended wars before they could spread. even the occasional extinct species that had actually been relocated to safer worlds. Incoming priority transmission from Earth Command, announced Lieutenant Torres. Admiral Rodriguez wants to speak with you directly, Captain. The Admiral's weathered face appeared on the main screen, his expression grim but determined. Behind him, Sarah could see the bustling activity of humanity's primary command center, hidden beneath the surface of Luna. Captain Chen, I hope you're ready for the next phase. The Council's response to our proposal has been mixed. How mixed? Sarah asked, though she suspected she already knew. 17 species have agreed to the evacuation protocols. 22 are demanding more information before they commit. 8 have declared our proposal to be an elaborate deception designed to weaken galactic defenses. And 3, Admiral Rodriguez paused, rubbing his temples. 3 have decided that if the Devourer is returning, they'd rather try to bargain with it than trust humanity. The news wasn't unexpected, but it was disappointing. Humanity had hoped that 50,000 years of mythology would carry more weight with galactic civilization. What's our timeline? Sarah asked. 18 months until the Devourer reaches the galactic rim. Maybe 24 if we're lucky. That gives us very little time to convince the holdout species and implement evacuation procedures for those who've agreed. Dr. Vasquez cleared her throat. Admiral, what about the Vorthak? Their representative seemed most receptive during the council session. Ambassador Zexhai has become our strongest advocate, the Admiral confirmed. The Vorthak have agreed to serve as coordinators for the evacuation protocols. They're also sharing their historical archives with us, which has provided some very interesting insights. A new file appeared on Sarah's workstation, marked with the highest security classifications. As she scanned the contents, her eyebrows rose steadily higher. According to Vorthak records, she read aloud, the original human evacuation wasn't as voluntary as we thought. There were significant philosophical divisions within humanity about the correct response to the Devourer. Some wanted to fight, others wanted to hide, and still others wanted to try communication. The group that chose evacuation won, Wright observed. Obviously. Actually, Vasquez said, studying her own copy of the files. All 3 groups got their way. The evacuation faction took most of humanity into exile. The fighters, well, they became something else entirely. And the communicators, she trailed off, her face pale. Elena, Sarah prompted. The communicators made contact with the Devourer 50,000 years ago. They're still in contact with it. They've been serving as a kind of early warning system, monitoring its dormancy and reporting on its eventual awakening. The bridge fell silent as the implications sank in. Humanity hadn't just been preparing defenses during their exile. They'd been maintaining active intelligence on their enemy. Where are they now? Sarah asked. Admiral Rodriguez answered from the screen. That's classified information, Captain. But I can tell you that they're the source of our detailed knowledge about the Devourer's capabilities and behavior. They've been changed by their long exposure to it, but they remain fundamentally human. Another priority alert chimed from the communication station. This time, the incoming signal carried emergency authorization codes from the Galactic Council. Captain Chen, came Prime Mediator Yilthara's translated voice. We need immediate assistance. The Draconian hegemony has just lost contact with their outer colonies. The disappearances match patterns from the ancient records. Sarah exchanged glances with her crew. The timeline had just accelerated dramatically. How many systems? She asked. 3 so far, but the pattern is expanding. Kethnar's people are demanding immediate military response. But our attempts to send reconnaissance missions have failed. Ships approach the affected areas and simply stop reporting. Not destroyed, Wright said quietly. Convinced they never existed in the first place. Admiral, Sarah said, turning back to the screen, we need to activate the combat protocols ahead of schedule. Agreed. Captain, you're hereby authorized to reveal the full extent of human preparations to the Council. If they're going to trust us, they need to understand exactly what they're trusting. As the transmission ended, Sarah felt the weight of command settling over her like a familiar cloak. She joined the space service to explore the unknown. Not to fight cosmic horrors that could rewrite reality itself, but sometimes exploration meant facing the things that lived in the dark between stars. Elena, prepare a complete briefing on Project Sanctuary. Everything including the parts that will scare them. Captain, Vasquez said hesitantly, some of this information, it's going to fundamentally change how they see humanity. Once they know what we're really capable of, there won't be any going back. Sarah looked out at the stars, knowing that somewhere among them, entire civilizations were beginning to doubt their own existence. There was never any going back, Elena. The moment we returned to the galaxy, we committed ourselves to this path. Now we need to see it through. As the Prometheus changed course toward the crisis zone, automated systems throughout human space began receiving new directives. The time for secrets was ending, and the time for action had begun. Across the galaxy, sleeping giants began to wake, and the true scope of humanity's 50,000-year preparation was about to be revealed. The Devourer was coming, but this time humanity wouldn't be facing it alone. This time they were ready. The emergency session of the Galactic Council convened in complete chaos. Ambassador HFY watched in growing alarm as representatives from 47 species argued simultaneously, their translation matrices overloading from the sheer volume of competing voices. The loss of 3 draconian colonies had shattered any remaining skepticism about the Devourer's return, but fear was proving to be a poor foundation for rational decision-making. Order. Prime Mediator Yilthara's voice cut through the cacophony with serpentine authority. We will address this crisis systematically, or we will face it divided and doomed. The chamber gradually quieted, though tensions remained visible in every delegate's posture. Kethanar of the Draconian hegemony stood at his species' speaking platform, his ancient scales dulled with grief and rage. My people are dying, he declared, his voice carrying the weight of millennia. 3 colonies, 2 million souls simply gone, not destroyed, not conquered, but erased as if they never existed. Our deep space sensors show empty space where thriving worlds once orbited their stars. The reconnaissance missions? Asked the Kalari Prime Speaker, her mandibles clicking with nervous energy. No contact after they reach the affected zones, Kethanar replied bitterly. 6 ships, our finest crews, and they simply stop. Their last transmissions speak of growing confusion, of difficulty remembering why they're there, or what they're supposed to be investigating. Ambassador Walsh rose from the human delegation's position, her expression grim but determined. Honored delegates, this is exactly what our historical records predicted. The Devourer doesn't just consume matter or energy. It consumes the very concept of existence itself. Your reconnaissance crews aren't dead. They're trapped in a state of conceptual uncertainty. Explain, demanded the Nexari representative, his energy form flickering with distress. Dr. Vasquez activated a holographic projector, displaying 3-dimensional models that hurt to look at directly. The Devourer operates by introducing logical paradoxes into the fundamental structure of reality. It convinces spacetime that certain things are impossible, and reality adjusts accordingly. Your missing colonies don't remember how to exist, because existence itself has become uncertain in those regions. The display showed mathematical equations that seemed to writhe and change when observed directly. Several delegates turned away, reporting immediate headaches from trying to process the information. This is why conventional military responses fail, Walsh continued. You can't shoot something that can convince your weapons they were never manufactured. You can't strategically outmaneuver an enemy that can make your tactical computers forget how mathematics works. Ambassador HFY accessed his deepest historical archives, correlating the current crisis with ancient Vorthak records. The parallels were exact, down to the progression of affected systems and the nature of the disappearances. What solution do you propose? He asked, though he suspected he already knew. Project Sanctuary, Walsh replied. A coordinated evacuation of all inhabited systems to prepared safe zones, coupled with the deployment of conceptual anchors designed to maintain local reality stability. Captain Chen materialized via holographic projection from the UES Prometheus, her image flickering with the interference of operating near the crisis zone. Delegates, I'm transmitting real-time sensor data from the edge of the affected area. What you're about to see will be disturbing. The main display filled with images that challenged comprehension. Space itself seemed uncertain, with stars that flickered between existing and not existing, gravitational fields that remembered being there but couldn't remember why, and regions where the background radiation of the universe carried overtones of profound confusion. We've identified 17 anchor points within the affected zone, Chen reported. These are locations where human deep cover installations have been maintaining reality stability for the past 50,000 years. They're the only reason the affected area hasn't expanded faster. The revelation that humanity had been secretly maintaining installations throughout the galaxy for millennia sent another wave of shock through the chamber. The implications were staggering, not just for the current crisis, but for every aspect of galactic history. "You've been watching us," accused the Avari representative, her feathered crest flaring with indignation. "Manipulating us, guiding our development from the shadows." "Protecting you," Walsh corrected firmly. "Every species in this chamber exists today because human caretakers prevented cosmic-scale disasters from reaching your worlds. Solar flares that would have sterilized entire systems, asteroid impacts that would have triggered extinction events, even the occasional space-time anomaly that would have unraveled local physics." Dr. Vasquez added more data to the display. "The Devourer isn't the only existential threat in the universe. During our exile, we've cataloged 17 different types of cosmic-scale dangers that can threaten galactic civilization. We've been quietly managing all of them." Keithanar leaned forward, his ancient eyes sharp with new understanding. "The war of impossible things. Our records speak of impossible victories, of battles won against overwhelming odds through means that made no strategic sense. Those were human interventions. Sometimes," Walsh admitted, "when the alternative was the complete destruction of developing civilizations, yes, we intervened. Always carefully, always subtly, and always with the goal of preserving life and promoting growth." The chamber fell silent as delegates absorbed this information. The mythology of human capability was revealing itself to be historical fact, and the implications were overwhelming. "The evacuation protocols," Ylthara said finally. "How do they work?" Captain Chen's projection shifted to show massive installations hidden throughout human space. "We've prepared sanctuary systems in 17 different dimensional pockets, each one designed to house billions of evacuees while maintaining stable reality anchors. The transportation network has been in place for millennia, disguised as natural phenomena like asteroid belts and nebulae. You're asking us to abandon our homes," the Kalari Prime speaker observed, though her tone carried resignation rather than accusation. "Temporarily," Walsh emphasized. "The evacuation is designed to reduce the complexity signatures that attract the Devourer's attention. Once galactic civilization appears sufficiently diminished, the entity should return to dormancy. Then we can begin systematic recolonization using improved reality anchor technology." "How long?" asked Zexai. "Projections vary," Chen admitted. "Minimum 500 years, maximum 3,000. The exact duration depends on how effectively we can convince the Devourer that the galaxy has become uninteresting." The timescales involved were staggering, but not impossible for species that measured history in geological epochs. More concerning was the trust required to commit entire civilizations to humanity's care. "The fighter faction," Ylthara said suddenly. "You mentioned that some humans chose to fight rather than evacuate. What became of them?" Walsh exchanged glances with Chen's projection. "That information is classified for good reason, Prime Mediator. Some knowledge is too dangerous to share until absolutely necessary." "It's necessary now," Keithanar declared. "My people are dying and you're asking us to trust in solutions that require abandoning everything we've built. We need to know the full scope of humanity's capabilities." Captain Chen was quiet for a long moment, clearly receiving new authorization through her communication systems. Finally, she nodded grimly. "The fighter faction became something beyond conventional humanity," she admitted. "They integrated themselves directly into the fabric of space-time, becoming living weapons capable of engaging the Devourer on its own conceptual level. They're still out there, still fighting, and they're the reason the Devourer's awakening has been so gradual this time." "Living weapons?" The Nexari representative flickered with something approaching terror. "Humans who sacrificed their physical existence to become incarnate concepts," Walsh explained. "They exist as pure ideas given form and purpose. They cannot be killed because they cannot be proven not to exist. And they've been holding the line against cosmic horrors for 50,000 years. The chamber fell into stunned silence. The scope of humanity's commitment to protecting the galaxy was beginning to become clear, and it was both inspiring and terrifying. As the session continued into the night cycle, more and more species committed to the evacuation protocols. The alternative, as the missing draconian colonies demonstrated, was not merely death but complete erasure from existence itself. The evacuation began 6 days after the Council's final vote. Across 47 star systems, entire civilizations packed the artifacts of their cultures into specially designed transport vessels that defied conventional understanding of physics. Captain Chen stood on the bridge of the Prometheus, coordinating the largest logistical operation in galactic history while monitoring the steadily expanding zone of conceptual uncertainty. Status report, she called out to her crew. Fourth act evacuation is 70% complete, reported Commander Wright. Their efficiency is remarkable. They've managed to preserve complete cultural databases while maintaining evacuation schedules ahead of projections. The Kalari are having more difficulty, added Lieutenant Torres. Their hive mind structure is creating complications with the transport protocols. Dr. Vasquez is working with their queens to develop modified procedures. Elena looked up from her xenobiological analysis station, where she'd been working around the clock to ensure that the evacuation procedures were compatible with each species' unique physiology and psychology. The problem with the Kalari isn't technical, she explained. Their collective consciousness is having trouble accepting the concept of temporary separation from their home worlds. To them, leaving their birth hives is almost like partial death. Solutions? Sarah asked. I'm working with their queens to establish psychic relay networks that will maintain hive connections across dimensional barriers. It's experimental, but the initial tests are promising. The main display showed a real-time map of galactic evacuation progress. Green indicators marked completed evacuations. Yellow showed operations in progress, and red highlighted systems that were refusing to participate or had gone silent. The expanding gray area around the draconian colonies marked regions where reality itself had become unreliable. Captain, announced the communications officer, incoming priority transmission from Sanctuary Prime. The display shifted to show Admiral Rodriguez, but he wasn't calling from Luna. Behind him stretched a vista that shouldn't have been possible, a star system that existed in folded space, where 3 suns orbited a planet that was simultaneously the size of a moon and larger than a gas giant. Captain Chen, we've got updates on the situation. The fighter faction has made contact. Sarah felt her stomach drop. The fighter faction represented humanity's most extreme response to cosmic threats, and their involvement meant the situation was far worse than anyone had admitted. What's their assessment? She asked. The Devourer isn't just awakening, Admiral Rodriguez replied grimly. It's evolving. 50,000 years of dormancy have allowed it to incorporate new conceptual frameworks into its arsenal. It's not just erasing things from existence anymore, it's creating alternative versions of reality where those things never could have existed. Dr. Vasquez looked up sharply. That's why the reconnaissance missions failed. The crews didn't just forget why they were there. They were convinced they were supposed to be somewhere else entirely. Exactly, and it gets worse. The fighter faction reports that the Devourer has learned to replicate itself. What we're facing isn't one entity. It's a spreading network of reality viruses, each one capable of independent action. The implications were staggering. The original evacuation protocols had been designed around containing a single cosmic entity. Fighting multiple Devourers would require resources humanity had never imagined needing. How many? Sarah asked. Current count is 7 confirmed entities with indications of more spawning at the rate of approximately 1 per week. At this rate of expansion, even the sanctuary dimensions won't be safe within a year. Commander Wright pulled up tactical projections on his station. Admiral, what about the anchor networks? Can we use them to create containment zones? That's what the fighter faction is attempting, Admiral Rodriguez confirmed. But they're taking casualties. When I say casualties, I mean humans who have existed as living concepts for 50,000 years are being convinced that they never were concepts to begin with. The bridge fell silent. If beings who existed as incarnate ideas could be erased by the Devourer's evolved capabilities, then traditional matter-based life stood no chance at all. There is one option, the Admiral continued reluctantly. The communicator faction has proposed a direct negotiation. Sarah felt her blood turn cold. Sir, with respect, the historical records are clear about what happens to species that try to communicate with the Devourer. Under normal circumstances, yes, but the communicators have been in contact with it for 50,000 years. They understand its nature better than anyone, and they believe they've identified something it wants more than galactic consumption. Elena leaned forward. What could an entity that consumes existence itself possibly want? purpose, Admiral Rodriguez replied. According to the communicators, the Devourer isn't malevolent in any way we understand. It's confused. It exists to consume complexity, but complexity keeps generating itself faster than it can be consumed. It's trapped in an eternal cycle of Sisyphean futility. The philosophical implications were as mind-bending as the physical ones. A cosmic entity that could rewrite reality was suffering from what amounted to cosmic depression. The proposal? Sarah asked. We offer it something it's never had before, a meaningful challenge. The communicators believe we can convince it to voluntarily limit its consumption, to maintain the complexity it feeds on, turning predation into symbiosis. And if the negotiation fails? Admiral Rodriguez's expression darkened. Then we activate Protocol Zero. Complete dimensional collapse of the galaxy, followed by systematic reconstruction from quantum backup data. It would take approximately 10 million years, but we could rebuild everything exactly as it was. The casual mention of rebuilding an entire galaxy from backup data reminded Sarah just how far beyond conventional thinking humanity had evolved during their exile. They weren't just preparing to fight cosmic horrors, they were preparing to become cosmic forces themselves. Permission to speak freely, Admiral. Granted, this is insane. We're talking about negotiating with an entity that can convince reality that mathematics doesn't work, offering it a symbiotic relationship that no one understands, with a backup plan that involves destroying and rebuilding the galaxy. How did we reach this point? Admiral Rodriguez smiled grimly. The same way humanity reaches any point, Captain. One impossible decision at a time, made by people who refuse to accept that impossible means impossible. An alert chimed from the tactical station. Commander Wright looked up with alarm. Captain, we're detecting new gray zones. The expansion rate has tripled in the last hour. The display updated to show the spreading zones of conceptual uncertainty. What had been a manageable crisis was rapidly becoming an existential threat to galactic civilization. Admiral, Sarah said, we need a decision. Evacuation protocols, negotiation, or Protocol Zero. We can't wait for more data. Agreed. Captain, you're hereby authorized to make contact with the communicator faction. Coordinate with them for immediate negotiation attempts. If that fails... He paused, the weight of cosmic responsibility visible in his eyes. If that fails, we'll show the universe that humanity doesn't back down from impossible odds. As the transmission ended, Sarah looked around at her crew. They were preparing to attempt something that had never been tried in the history of galactic civilization. Reasoning with a force of nature that existed beyond reason itself. Elena, prepare a complete analysis of the communicator faction's proposals. Wright, coordinate with the fighter faction for tactical support during negotiations. Torres, establish quantum encrypted channels with all evacuation sites. Yes, ma'am, came the unanimous reply. Outside the viewports, stars continued their ancient dance, unaware that their continued existence was about to depend on humanity's most uniquely impossible characteristic: the absolute refusal to admit defeat. The meeting point existed in a fold of space-time that shouldn't have been possible, where the normal rules of physics bent around humanity's need for impossibility. Captain Chen felt the Prometheus shudder as they translated into the negotiation zone, reality itself protesting their presence in a region where existence was more suggestion than fact. Sensors are having difficulty maintaining coherent readings, reported Commander Wright. His voice strained from the effort of processing information that kept changing its mind about being real. That's normal here, came a new voice from the communications array. The speaker identified herself as Dr. Sarah Matthias, though the name came with metadata indicating she hadn't been strictly human for approximately 47,000 years. Welcome to the Deep Between. Try not to think too hard about the paradoxes. Through the main viewport, the Devourer became visible. Calling it visible wasn't accurate, since it existed as much as concept as matter. But human perception was remarkably adaptable when survival was at stake. It appeared as a shifting mass of contradictions, simultaneously enormous and tiny, ancient and newly born, malevolent and benevolent. First time seeing one? Dr. Matthias asked through the communications link. Her words carried harmonics that suggested she was speaking from multiple dimensional phases simultaneously. Yes, Sarah replied, unable to look away from the entity that had driven humanity into 50,000 years of exile. It's not what I expected. It never is. The devourer doesn't conform to expectations because expectations are a form of complexity it can consume. What you're seeing is filtered through human cognitive defenses developed over millennia of careful observation. Dr. Vasquez looked up from her station, where readings fluctuated between impossible and merely improbable. How do we communicate with something that exists beyond conventional meaning? Very carefully, came the reply. The communicator faction has developed protocols over 50,000 years of contact. The key is to avoid offering it information that increases universal complexity while providing enough substance to maintain its interest. Ambassador Walsh's voice joined the conversation via quantum relay from the Evacuation Coordination Center. Dr. Matthias, what exactly are we offering the devourer? Partnership, the communicator replied. For 50,000 years we've been studying its nature and psychology. The devourer isn't evil in any sense we understand. It's a cosmic force that exists to maintain universal entropy, but it's been doing so in the most inefficient way possible. It consumes complexity randomly, which generates more complexity as systems adapt to its presence. Captain Chen watched as the entity moved closer to their position, space-time rippling around it like water around a stone that was simultaneously sinking and floating. What kind of partnership? We propose that instead of random consumption, it work with galactic civilization to manage complexity growth in a sustainable way. Think of it as cosmic ecology rather than cosmic predation. The concept was staggering in its audacity. Humanity was proposing to domesticate a force of nature that could rewrite the fundamental laws of physics. Has it responded to previous communication attempts? Sarah asked. It's been listening for 50,000 years, Dr. Matthias replied. The devourer is curious about humanity because we're the only species that has ever voluntarily reduced our own complexity for its benefit. It doesn't understand altruism, but it recognizes that our behavior represents something new in its experience. The communications array suddenly filled with harmonics that bypassed the auditory system entirely, creating meaning directly in the minds of everyone aboard the Prometheus. The sensation was overwhelming, like trying to drink from a waterfall of pure concept. Why do the small complexities return when they were given cessation? The question came with overtones of genuine confusion, and what might have been hurt feelings, if cosmic entities were capable of such things. Ambassador Walsh responded through the quantum relay, her diplomatic training allowing her to process the alien communication format. We return because we believe there is a better way for you to achieve your purpose. You seek to maintain universal balance, but your current methods create more imbalance than they resolve. Explain the alternative method. Dr. Vasquez stepped forward, her xenobiological expertise suddenly relevant on a cosmic scale. Instead of consuming complexity randomly, work with us to identify and manage complexity growth patterns. Some complexity is necessary for universal function, some is wasteful excess. We can help you distinguish between them. The devourer's response came as a cascade of mathematical concepts that temporarily convinced the ship's computers that arithmetic was optional. Demonstrate the distinction. What followed was the most unusual scientific presentation in galactic history. Dr. Matthias and the communicator faction, working through quantum relays, showed the devourer examples of complexity that served universal function versus complexity that was merely accumulative. They demonstrated how galactic civilizations could be managed to maintain optimal complexity levels without requiring periodic erasure. The proposal has merit, the entity eventually responded. But what prevents the small complexities from growing beyond optimal parameters when observation is not constant? That's where the partnership comes in, Ambassador Walsh explained. Humanity will serve as complexity managers for this galaxy. We'll monitor growth patterns, intervene when necessary, and report to you on macro-scale trends. In exchange, you refrain from random consumption and work with us to develop better management protocols. The negotiation continued for 17 hours, during which time the crew of the Prometheus experienced temporal displacement, dimensional uncertainty, and at least 3 separate instances of temporarily ceasing to exist. The devourer's cognitive processes operated on scales that challenged human comprehension. But the communicator faction had developed translation protocols that made meaningful dialogue possible. Agreement is acceptable, came the final response. Trial period, 1 galactic rotation. Evaluation parameters, complexity growth rates, universal entropy balance, small complexity satisfaction indices. It's agreed to a trial partnership, Dr. Matthias announced, her voice carrying overtones of exhaustion and relief. 25,000 years to prove that managed complexity is more effective than random consumption. As the devourer began to withdraw from local spacetime, reality gradually stabilized around the Prometheus. The gray zones of conceptual uncertainty started contracting, and the missing draconian colonies began remembering how to exist. "Captain," Commander Wright reported, "we're receiving communications from the evacuation sites. The sanctuary dimensions are reporting that refugees are requesting permission to return home." "Granted," Sarah replied, though she kept her attention focused on the retreating cosmic entity. "But maintain the anchor networks and keep the sanctuary systems on standby. We've got 25,000 years to prove that humanity can manage an entire galaxy's complexity growth." Dr. Vasquez looked up from her station with a bemused expression. "Captain, according to my readings, we've just been appointed as the galaxy's cosmic maintenance crew." "Could be worse," Sarah replied with a tired smile. "We could have had to rebuild everything from backup data." As the Prometheus began its journey back to normal space, reports flooded in from across the galaxy. The Devourer's spawn were reverting to dormancy. The missing colonies were gradually remembering their existence, and reconnaissance missions were reporting successful contact with previously unreachable areas. Ambassador Walsh's voice came through the quantum relay one final time. "Captain Chen, Admiral Rodriguez wants you to know that the evacuation is officially transitioning to recolonization protocols. Also, congratulations. Humanity has just achieved something unprecedented in cosmic history." "What's that?" Sarah asked. "We've successfully negotiated a cosmic entity into early retirement." Looking out at the stars that now fell under humanity's protection, Captain Chen reflected on the strange path that had brought them to this point. 50,000 years ago, humanity had chosen exile over destruction. Today they had chosen partnership over domination. The legends had been right about one thing. Humans were indeed unlike any other species in the galaxy. They were the only ones stubborn enough to believe that impossible problems required impossible solutions, and optimistic enough to keep trying until they found them. As galactic civilization began the long process of rebuilding under humanity's watchful protection, one thing became clear. The age of random cosmic destruction was ending, and the age of managed cosmic partnership had begun. The galaxy was finally safe, not because humanity had conquered its threats, but because they had convinced those threats to become allies instead.